Hello, and welcome to another chapter of the Lost Years of Merlin series. We are on Book 3, Chapter 7. In the last chapter, it was pretty chill chapter. Merlin couldn't sleep, and a hedgehog was butting at his back, and he found Rhea stargazing, and they were just having a nice conversation. And then in This is chapter 7, called The Stone Circle. Through most of the following day, we trekked north through Druma Wood. Thanks to Rhea's knowledge of the hidden pathways made by fox paws and deer hooves, we had covered much ground, and quickly. Only twice did our speed slacken. In crossing a thick stretch of thorny brambles, as high as our hips in places, that ripped our clothing and raked our shins, and in climbing a buttress of rocks whose shadowed face already wore a slick layer of ice. Most of the time, though, Rhea's relentless pace left me breathless. She charged up hills, leaped across rivulets, and ran effortlessly through glades of oak, beech, and hemlock. Half deer herself, she seemed, as I struggled to keep up with her. Whenever she spotted some tangy mushrooms or sweet berries, I felt doubly grateful, since they staved off our hunger and also gave us a chance to pause. Yet I never complained about our pace. Arnaldo's urgent plea still rang in my ears. Time leaned on me, as heavily as a toppled tree. If only I could get there faster. And if only I had a better idea of what to do once I arrived. Early that afternoon, we entered a grove of cedars that skirted the base of a hillside. Suddenly, the wind grew stronger. Branches waved wildly, slapping and scraping. Trunks twisted and moaned. Rhea halted, listening intently to the cacophony around us. Cacophony around us, looking grimmer by the minute. At length, she turned to me. The trees. I've never heard them so agitated before. What are they saying? Turn back. Over and over, they keep saying, the boy of the wizard's staff will... She paused, working her tongue. Will die, as surely as a sapling smothered in flames. I cringed, touching the still tender scars on my face. But I can't turn back. If I don't face Valdirk, then you and everyone else, including every tree in this forest, will have to face him. The Drima will be a graveyard. The spicy scent of cedar pricked my nostrils. If I must die, though, I only wish. I paused, listening to the clacking and creaking of the trees. That I could be certain that I will slay him, too. Rhea's gray-blue eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. The question, I said gravely, is how. I'm not ready to battle a dragon, let alone slay one. Never will be, probably. Not after what happened. Back there at the Rowan. No, I'm still just the boy of the wizard's staff, not a true wizard. A branch snapped just above us, splintering as it struck the ground at our feet. Rhea, biting her lip, turned to go. Buried in my thoughts, I followed. In time, the sound of our boots squelching through muddy soil replaced the wailing of the branches. Puddles filled every path. Trees grew sparser, except for the whitened skeletons of those whose roots had long ago drowned. Water birds whistled in the rising mist, while the first traces of a rotting smell fouled the air. I turned to Rhea as we walked. Is this the great swamp at the Druma's northern edge, or a different one? She planted her boot of woven bark against a mound of peat, testing its firmness before plodding across. It's part of the Great Swamp. But more than that I can't say. We're much farther east than the stretch I usually crossed, since I took the most direct route. I thought it would save some time. Her voice dropped. I hope I was right. The mud sucked at my boots. So do I. The swamp, I knew, was not the only treacherous land ahead. When we reached the other side, we would find the fog-laden gullies of the living stones. Too often I had heard tales of travelers whose legs, arms, or heads had been so suddenly removed from their bodies, crushed in the jaws of rock. Nor could I shake the memory of the time when the lips of a living stone had nearly swallowed my own hand. We began sloshing through a flooded stretch, stepping over decaying trunks and branches. By the time we reached a thick stretch of bog grasses, the sun had vanished behind a sheath of clouds. I looked over my shoulder at the western horizon. Rhea glanced in the same direction, then at me. Clouds are gathering, Merlin. There won't be any stars to guide us tonight. If we haven't reached the other side by nightfall, we'll need to rely on your second sight to find our way. I took a deep breath, though the air reeked of things rotting. That's not what worries me. It's what lives in this swamp, and what stirs after dark. Silently, we trekked on, slogging through water up to our knees. In the waning light, strange sounds began to bubble up from the bog. From one side came a thin, unsteady hum. From behind us, a sudden splash, though we whirled around to see nothing. Then a thwack, and a screech of pain, as if someone's skull had been split. Soon, the darkening mists echoed with distant wailing. Without warning, something slithered past my shin. I jumped, leaving behind my boot in the process. Whatever it was quickly vanished, but we lost several minutes extracting my boot from the mud. Sunset came and went without any change in the gloom. As dusk deepened around us, the wild sounds swelled. Suddenly, Rhea stumbled, falling into a reeking pool. When she climbed out, I saw a huge leech, as long as my forearm, clinging to the dripping leaves on her back. It squirmed toward her neck. With a swipe of my staff, I knocked it away. The creature hissed shrilly before landing with a splash. The light faded steadily. I began probing with my staff to help us avoid pits of quicksand and whatever else lurked in the depths. We slogged on, trying always to head northward. But how could we keep our bearings without sun, moon, or stars? Each stumble, each twist in the route took its toll. Merely staying together proved more difficult by the minute. In the deepening darkness, strange shapes, twisting and writhing, rose out of the marsh. At first I tried to convince myself they were nothing but gases bubbling up from below, or shadows, a trick of the waning light. But their ghoulish forms didn't move like gases, or shadows. They moved like alive things. The shapes began sighing, almost weeping. Then came sudden cries of anguish, cries that jabbed like icicles in my ears. As fast as we tramped, the shapes pressed closer. A hand, or what seemed to be a hand, grasped at my tunic. I dodged it, nearly tripping in the process. Just then, in the near blackness, I detected a vague, sloping contour ahead. But for the high mound in its center, it looked as rounded as the back of a great turtle. An island! Though the writhing shapes hampered my vision, the island seemed devoid of life. Rhea, I called. An island! She halted. Are you sure? Look that way. She leaped to the side to avoid one of the shapes. Let's go then, before these things, get away you, drown us in the muck. Taking her by the elbow, I rushed forward. The shapes writhed more frantically, swirling about us, but we eluded them. Finally, we reached the edge of the island. While the wailing cries continued, we trudged ashore, leaving the eerie shapes behind. Total darkness embraced us as we climbed higher. Despite the squelching of thick vines underfoot, the land seemed fairly dry and solid. With my second sight, I surveyed the area. Only the massive mound, brooding and mysterious, broke the island's smooth surface. Nothing lives here, I noted. Not even a lizard. Why, do you think? Rhea stretched her back wearily. I don't know. I'm just glad that those things aren't here. I approached the mound. It was, I realized, a great boulder, about as high as a young oak tree. I froze. There are no living stones around here, are there? No, they keep to the higher ground, in the hills beyond. Here in the swamp we have other creatures to worry about. Cautiously, I drew nearer to the boulder. I tapped it with my staff. A flake of moss broke off, spinning lazily to the ground. I placed my hand upon the surface, leaning into it until I felt certain of its solidity, its stoneness. Well, all right, I declared, but it still seems odd, a huge boulder sitting all by itself in the middle of a swamp like this, as if someone placed it here for some sort of reason. Rhea squeezed my arm. If it's all by itself, then at least you can be sure it's not a living stone. They always travel in groups, 5 or 6 together. She yawned. Merlin, I'm about to drop. How about a little rest? Until dawn? I suppose so, I yawned myself. We're not going back out there until the light returns anyway. Go ahead and rest. I'll take the first watch. You'll stay alert? She waved at the stump, whose chorus of harrowing sounds continued. We don't want any visitors. Don't worry. In unison, we collapsed at the base of the boulder. Tired though I was, I propped myself stiffly against the rock, determined to stay awake. A sharp knob pushed into the tender spot between my shoulder blades, but I didn't move. Better to have the security of something solid behind me. No more swamp creatures would surprise us in this night. Rhea, stretched out by my feet, gave my ankle a squeeze. Thanks for taking the first watch. I'm not used to having someone look after me on a trek. I grunted wearily. That's because nobody can keep up with you on a trek. Then I added, It's our mother, I'm afraid, who needs looking after. She must be so lonely right now. Mother? Rhea rolled to her side. She's upset, worried sick about us probably, but not lonely. She is Carepree. He'll stick to her like resin to pine. Do you really think so? My fingers slid down the shaft of my staff. He always has so much to do. I thought he would get her settled somewhere, then go on his way. Rhea's laughter joined the noises bubbling out of the swamp. Haven't you noticed what's been happening to them? Really, you must be as thick as this boulder to have missed it. No, I snapped. I haven't missed anything. You're not telling me they, have some interest in each other, are they? No, they're well beyond that already. You think they're falling in love? That's right. Come now, Rhea. You're dreaming even before you've fallen asleep. That sort of thing doesn't happen to, yes? To mothers. At least not our mother. She giggled. Sometimes, dear brother, you amaze me. I do believe you've been so wrapped up in your training the past few months that you've missed the whole thing. Besides, falling in love could happen to anyone, even you. Oh, sure, I scoffed. Next you'll try to convince me that we'll find a tasty meal in a pool of quicksand. A despairing sigh was her only response. I'm too tired to convince you of anything right now. In the morning, if you like, I'll enlighten you. Tempted as I was to reply, I held my tongue. Right now, we needed to rest. I adjusted my back against the boulder. Enlighten me, indeed. How could she be so sure of herself? Even as I grumbled silently about Rhea, I stretched my second sight all the way across the island. Nothing stirred, nothing approached. The night progressed, full of the ongoing cacophony of the swamp. Yet no creatures joined us on this shore. I began to wonder whether the boulder itself might somehow deter visitors, though I could not understand why. Still, in an eerie way, it seemed more than it appeared. Perhaps it was some quality of the rank air of the marsh or the result of my own exhaustion, or perhaps it was some silent magic of the living stone itself. Whatever the cause, it was only when I felt Rhea's hand pulling wildly on my foot that I realized that I had been swallowed by a mouth of stone, and by then it was too late. Bum bum bum! Okay, my friends, that is chapter 7. So tomorrow at 10 p.m., we will read chapter 8 called Circle Stone. Thank you for joining me. I do read off stream. I don't read the chapter beforehand, if that's what you mean, but I do read other books off stream. And then, but these chapters I read live with no practice. And then, yeah, I don't know if other people read on Twitch. I just thought it would be a good idea. It all kind of started with like the quarantine thing, and I was like, oh, I wonder if people would like a book, a bedtime story kind of thing. And then also, thank you for your compliment. I always kind of didn't like my voice, so I'm glad to hear that someone does. But thank you all for joining me, and have a wonderful night. Bye.